I took the night shift at a desert gas station off Highway 19 so I could stop thinking about the things I had lost. The first thing the owner told me was a rule that sounded like a joke. After midnight, don't look at their eyes. Ray hired me in the glow of a busted neon cactus that hummed like a trapped fly. He was a thin man with sunburned knuckles and a white mustache you could have rolled a cigarette with. He slid the keys across the counter, along with a dog-eared list of procedures and a sheet of local courtesies that didn't look corporate. On the bottom, written in a different hand in darker ink, was that same line, boxed in like a warning label. The place sat at mile marker 285, a low concrete island against a wide, empty slice of night. On one side, the highway drew a silver vein to the mountains, black on black. On the other, the desert ran out to nothing but scrub, dry riverbeds, and old fences that had outlasted the reason they were built. Wind pushed sand across the lot in slow, glinting snakes, and the stars felt so close they pressed against the roof. I learned to register the coffee machine, the cooler doors that breathed cold out in a white sight each time they opened. I learned the lock on the bathroom that stuck unless you pulled it toward you while you turned the key. I learned how the bell above the door made two different sounds, one for coming in and one for leaving, even though the bell itself never moved. I told myself those were just quirks. Every place had them. Most nights were empty and straightforward. A rancher came through with diesel and a thermos, talked about feed. A couple of kids in dusty jeans bought energy shots and laughed at a joke they didn't share. Some truckers rolled heavy and slow, their engines idling like big animals trying to find a place to lie down. The normalness of it became a kind of quiet, and in that quiet my mind softened. I stocked shelves. I counted scratch-off tickets. I watched the bugs throw themselves at the fluorescent lights and listened to coyotes argue out on the flats. I started sleeping during the day again, and the dream with the door I couldn't open stopped visiting. The first time I heard the other bell, it was a little past 1 a.m. when the wind dropped like someone cut a line. The chime rang, the low one for leaving, and the door stayed closed. I looked up from a stack of chips, expecting to see it swinging. The glass was still, and my reflection was steady, just me and the rows of candy like a small city behind me. I told myself it was the AC kicking on at the same time, pressure change, some physics thing. I walked to the door anyway, because pretending not to care is different from not caring. I put my hand on the handle and felt that cold you only get from metal that has been in the shade all day. Outside, the pump stood quiet, numbers at 0, their screens showing my face in a flicker. There was no one. The lot lights buzzed and the night pressed close like it was leaning in to listen. I stood there, feeling stupid and a little embarrassed for no reason, and then I noticed the receipt printer murmuring by the register. It was printing a long, thin tongue of paper into the empty air. I went back and tore it off. It had the time, but the time was wrong, 2:13 a.m., even though my phone said 1:07. The items were nonsense. Road salt, 0.00. Guest payment, C. At the bottom was a message. Thank you for your patronage. No total, no tax, no car brand. Just that. I slid the paper into the drawer with the carbon copies because Ray said never throw any of them away. I made a note on the scratch pad. Maybe the printer had glitched from heat, or the paper roll was catching. Maybe the previous cashier had left a test print in the queue. I restocked the refrigerator, the cold air cracking my knuckles. I took out the trash and watched it shiver in the crosswind, as if something inside it was trying to find a shape. When I came back in, the air felt different, like the pressure in a plane cabin when it starts to descend. I told myself to stop giving the night too much credit. Around 2, a gray sedan pulled up to pump 3 and stopped on the line like it was posing for a photo. The windows were tinted dark, but I could see the pale wedge of a face through the windshield, looking at the store. The engine didn't idle. It was just there, quiet, as if it had come to rest. I could make out the driver's hands on the wheel, very still, like he was waiting for a signal I didn't know how to give. I flipped on the outside intercom, and told them they had to prepay after midnight. My voice sounded normal, but too loud to my own ears. The speaker crackled. There was a pause, and then something like a whisper dragged across the line, too soft to be words. I tried again, and this time I kept it simple. Prepay, please. The driver lifted one hand and held it up in a slow wave that didn't feel like a wave. I waited. He didn't move to get out. He lifted his other hand, and for a moment I thought I saw the fingers bend backward before they found the right direction. I told myself the glass could warp things at that angle, and my reflection layered over has made a trick out of it. I told myself the desert does that, turns distance into a lens that lies. I moved back from the window, and when I looked again, the sedan was gone. No engine sound, no tires on gravel, no exit, just empty pumps and the trembling, ordinary night. The printer murmured again. This time the receipt spit out clean and short. Date time, pump 3, $0.00, and no sale. That can happen when a card tap fails. I still felt something slide off my shoulders when I filed it. I made coffee that smelled like burnt toast. I walked the aisles and straightened labels. I checked the bathroom because even though you're supposed to keep it locked at night, people will still try the handle and be offended that it doesn't accommodate them. The bolt was thrown just like I'd left it, and a moth pulsed its wings in the corner like a slow heartbeat. The second incident came at 2:13, and I know that because my phone and the clock above the cigarettes agreed. The power blinked like someone opened and closed their hand over the station in one motion. The lights went from white to a darker white and back, and the cooler hummed itself back into a steady tone like a voice searching for a note. The bell above the door rang, the coming-in chime. A man stood at the threshold, half in and half out, not because he hesitated, but because the world seemed slow around him. He wore a suit that looked expensive and didn't belong to the desert, and he had one hand in his jacket like someone might reach for a business card. He didn't step in. He tilted his head slightly, and that small motion turned his face into a mask of something thoughtful but wrong. I felt a little surge of shame because I couldn't find what was wrong, only that something had missed. Bathroom is closed, I said, for no real reason. His mouth moved like he was rehearsing the shape of a word before he let it out. Then he smiled, and it was generous and empty at the same time, a curve drawn by someone who had never done it for real. I told him we were cash only for the night. I don't know why I said that either. He stepped back. The bell rang, leaving. The door never swung. Outside, there were no fresh footprints in the strip of dusty welcome mat where every boot and sneaker had left its ghost. I stood there longer than I meant to, the way you stand at the edge of a diving board. And then I checked the camera. The angle over the entrance showed the door glass, my face behind it, and the lot. No man, no suit, no shadow, nothing interrupting the pixels except the lights bug snow. I scrubbed the timeline back and forth and watched myself look at something that wasn't there. I told myself the camera could glitch, and I remembered the cold needles of the wind and how it could push. I told myself that maybe he had stood just out of frame and I'd filled in the rest. I told myself to think like Ray. If it didn't break, it didn't happen. Still, I found myself reading the line on the paper taped inside the cash drawer. The one in that darker ink, like I was checking a word in a dictionary I didn't trust. The desert has a way of changing the speed of time without touching the hands of clock. Between 3 and 4, the hours felt like they folded, and I learned how to tell cars apart by their silhouettes before they turned off the road. A pickup with a hay rack, a dented hatchback that left a restlessness behind it like the bays from a distant party. A tow truck that drove by twice in 10 minutes, both times with its lights off. The wind brought a smell like hot pennies. I didn't know if that was real or something my mind made out of fear and caffeine. I went outside to check the squeegees because you act normal to stay normal. The lot felt crowded by things you can't name. I kept my eyes on the pumps and on the ground. I didn't look at the windows because I didn't want to see myself looking back in that way a mirror can catch you mid-thought. The moon had not risen, and the stars felt like foxfire. Somewhere out past the reach of the lights, a coyote yipped, and another answered higher and shorter, like an echo that hadn't learned how to be one. When I came back in, the door chime made only the first half of its sound. The rest of it rolled around the ceiling like a marble in a bowl and then settled somewhere above the coffee machine. I thought of calling Ray, but I couldn't think of how to explain anything in a way that didn't sound like a request to be replaced. Instead, I checked the stack of receipts again and found 2 new slips, one marked return, one blank except for a timestamp that had no date. Around 4, the radio under the counter, the old weather band Ray, kept, even though everyone has apps now, woke itself with static. It hissed like sand between teeth, and then a voice crawled out of it, flat and careful, reading coordinates. They were close enough to ring a bell in the back of my head. I'd seen them once on a map taped to the office wall, a cattle gate 10 miles south by Dry Wash. The voice said, "Extreme Heat Advisory," which made no sense at that hour and that temperature. "Copy," I said, because answering made me feel like I was inside the same world as the sound. The voice paused, then read the same coordinates, but with one number wrong, like it had rotated the grid and was trying to see if I would notice. I turned it off. The click sounded like a knuckle. The silence after had weight. There are rules about who you talk to at 4 a.m. mostly. You talk to yourself in the voice of people who aren't there. I told myself to sweep. I told myself to mark down the inventory we were low on. Radiator fluid, windshield wipes, paper cones for coffee. The third incident wasn't an incident so much as the world trying to convince me I had no place in it. Headlights came slow up the ramp and then rose as if they had decided to drive into the sky. For a second, the lot lit up like noon, long shadows pointing toward the highway. When the light fell away, the pumps looked like they had been moved a little to the left. The receipts kept printing little stutters of nonsense. Guessed, NO card, approved. Sometimes I would get a phone call that had no sound and then a fax noise like I was in an office in 1998. Once I heard my own voice ask if we carried road salt, even though the only salt we kept was for chips. I hung up on myself and made the mistake of looking at the convex safety mirror above the counter because I needed to see the whole store at once. It showed me the aisles and the coolers in the door. It showed me, to a second me, standing half a step behind where I actually stood, head tilted like I was listening to something I didn't want to fully hear. When I moved, that version of me lagged, like a bad connection, catching up with a ripple. I turned the mirror to face the ceiling and told myself I did it, because it was dusty. That was when the hitchhiker came. He was barefoot, and his feet were cracked and dark with road, and he held his hands close to his chest like he was trying to keep something from leaking out of him. He wore a t-shirt with a band name I knew from high school, and that small familiarity scared me more than anything else that night. He knocked 3 times on the glass, each knock soft and apologetic. I didn't want to open the door. That had nothing to do with any rule and everything to do with the way he avoided looking at his reflection when he leaned to peer inside. He kept his eyes down, and I thought that was considerate until I realized how deliberate it looked, like he was following instructions. I picked up the phone to call the sheriff's non-emergency line and then set it down because I didn't know what to say. He mouthed help and tapped his throat, and I told myself he might be dehydrated. I pointed to the water cooler and the sign that said staff can assist. I held up one finger for wait because that felt like something kind. I walked to the back room to get a bottle because something in me insisted I shouldn't turn my back on the front door until I was at least 2 doorways away. When I came back, he was gone. The dust on the mat kept his footprints like a fossil, but the last print was half missing, as if it had been erased by a cloth that didn't need hands. Across the lot, near Pump 1, a shimmer stood where the heat should rise in afternoon, a column of nothing standing on nothing. I watched it until my eyes watered, and when I blinked, it was the air again. At 4:37 a.m., the generator burped and the lights dimmed for a beat that lasted longer than a beat. The dark was not complete because of the emergency strips near the exits, and in that weak light, the store felt like its own reflection. Shapes lost their edges. I felt how alone the place really was, a square of glass and artificial daylight, dropped into the middle of a huge, patient thing. I thought of the line on the paper, the one written by a different hand than Ray's. I thought it like prayer, not because I believed in it, but because it was something to hold. After midnight, don't look at their eyes. I repeated it silently and out of order, like a kid learning it for a spelling test. I stayed behind the counter because the counter made a line between me and the rest of the night. Then the door opened. I didn't hear the bell. I felt the change. Air moved. Smells came in, dry and metallic, like an old coin dropped on a hot plate. I stood still because I had learned that movement is an answer. Shoes hit tile. They sounded careful, then confident, then like they had found the rhythm of walking on a floor that had a different speed than the ground outside. I fixed my eyes on a lottery counter where a little sign told you the odds and then lied about hope. Someone came up to the coffee station, and I heard the pumps click and then click again like they were finding the end of something invisible. It took everything I had not to look. My neck twitched like a dog who hears a whistle humans can't. I picked up the phone again and dialed Ray's number because the act of putting digits in order could hold my mind. The line purred and then harshened into that old stick-slip dial tone when a storm is too far off to hear, but close enough to be true. A voice near the condiments said, "Do you have the little cups?" It would have been ordinary, except there was no breath in it. There was the shape of breath, but not the moisture that makes it sound a body. I said, "By the lids." The sound moved like a person moves when they're deciding what they want their night to be. Another voice answered it, almost the same voice, but a half tone off, like petty harmonizing. They talked about sugar like it was a new word, and one was teaching the other how to make it fit. I looked at the register and stared so hard at the small green numbers that I could feel their shape on the inside of my eyelids. One of them said something on the counter. I could see it in my peripheral vision, a bottle of water, label turned out like a display. The plastic had a dent in it that wasn't a dent so much as a place where the idea of volume was different. The cap was missing. "How much?" the voice asked, and it sounded closer than the bottle looked. I said the price with my mouth too dry to sell it. I held out my hand with the change before they had given me anything because I needed my body to do a sequence correctly. A card slid toward me, but it felt like it slid through something else first. I swiped without looking. The name on the card made no sense when the edge of it reached me. It was letters that were almost letters, the way a dream gets your middle school locker combination almost right. "Approved," said the machine, and I handed air to where a hand should be. Something skin brushed my knuckle, cool and pliant, like the underside of a lizard. My stomach turned over and set itself down gently, like a careful landing. "Thank you," the voice said, and I flinched at how polite it was. The bottle slid away. The shoes crossed the floor again. The door breathed open and shut, and this time the bell remembered its job and rang twice. I waited a count of 60 before I let my eyes find the window. Outside, the lot held only the light and the pumps and the line where the desert sucked darkness back into itself. After, the store had that party after feeling, a thin film of something you can only see when you're tired. I wiped the counter and knew I was wiping off nothing that would show on a rag. The printer coughed and gave me a receipt that said, "No signature required," and under it, just the word "look." I turned it over and flushed hot when I realized I'd done exactly what it asked. At 5, a dust storm rolled in from the south like a wall being pushed on casters. You can smell those before you see them, soil and electricity, and old rain that never fell. The sky cinnamon-ed itself in a smear, and the lights outside went into a world where light doesn't behave right. The pumps disappeared and reappeared in gusts, and my heartbeat found the gaps. The storm hit the glass with a sound like a crowd whispering. The door shook in its frame and then settled in like a dog into a bed it trusts. The radio tried to speak again and failed. I thought of the cattle gate and the coordinates and cast my mind toward the road to see if I could feel any cars on it the way you can feel a train through the rails. The next part is hard because it felt like many minutes and also one long one. There were people in the store who were not people. They moved like they were wearing bodies they'd washed a few times and were trying on to see if they had the hang of it. They never came close enough for me to count them, even though I think there were 3. Touching the counter helped. So did the rule, The one I had laughed at, because rules are only funny when you need them. I said it in my head like I was counting inventory. After midnight, don't look at their eyes. I kept my gaze on the little world of the register and let the rest of the room be a blur on purpose. They took things. They put things back in the wrong places with earnest clumsiness, as if the shelf itself mattered more than the label. They breathed when I breathed and stopped when I stopped, like we were sharing a metronome. They asked about restrooms without asking, standing near the sign in a way that turned me into an answer. When the worst moment came, it didn't come with any fanfare. Something leaned on the counter very close, and I could see the edge of it, the seam where sleeve becomes wrist. The hairs on my arms drew up toward it, not with fear exactly, but with the way your body reaches toward a socket, because there's a little thunder living in it. I felt more than saw the head tilt to find my face. The desire to look was simple and total. It was not curiosity and not defiance. It was the same thing that makes you want to look over the guardrail when the drop is clean, just to give your brain something to push against. My eyes move a fraction on their own, and I use my whole self to pull them back, like hauling a dog away from a road. "Do you know what time it is?" the voice asked, and this time I could hear a second voice inside it, like a recording taped over another recording. I said the time mechanically and made it a little earlier than it was. The bottle cap rolled off the counter and stopped against my thumb as if it had been thrown with skill. I put my hand on it and felt the ridges cut a pattern into my palm. It was quiet then, that quiet of big storms when the wind turns from push to drag. My ears rang with it, and the lights fluttered twice, as if something had walked between the power company and me. A shape moved away through the corner of my eye, and I let it pass. I breathed out slow and tasted dust. The door opened, and this time the bell rang wrong again. Half a chime cut off, and the air reversed and sucked some of the store with it. The napkins on the hot dog counter fanned and then collapsed. The price tag along the candy row trembled in a running wave like wheat. Everything settled into position that was slightly not the same as before. When it was over, there was no sign of them. The dust pressed itself into all the edges and tried to become part of the building. I picked up the bottle cap and put it behind the counter because I couldn't put it in the trash. I stood there and let my heart catch up with itself. The storm moved past in the last 30 minutes before dawn, and the sky turned into a smear of rust that softened into bone. Birds tried morning sounds and gave up, starting again when the light got more certain about itself. I unlocked the bathroom because routine felt like an apology the building needed. I found a folded note on the sink where no one had been. It was a paper towel torn down the perforation and creased clean like someone with tidy habits had done it. Inside, in block letters that looked like mine if you squeezed them, someone had written, "Did you see it?" Under that, smaller, "Did it see you?" I held it in my hands and understood that if I put it in the trash, it would still be with me. At 6, Ray's truck came up the ramp like a confession he had decided to make. He parked as far from the door as he could and still call it parking. He stepped out, looked at the lot, looked at the sky, and then did what you do when nothing obvious is wrong. He looked at me. "What?" he said, not a question and not one. I handed him the stack of odd receipts. He took them and didn't read them, just slid them into the office inbox without breaking eye contact. He poured himself coffee and stood with it like a man in a photograph, like the stillness applied to him from the outside. "You do okay?" he asked. I said I'd had some weirdness. He nodded like I had told him the brand of filter. He glanced at the convex mirror and then at where it should have been, because I had turned it to face the ceiling. He wiped a finger along the counter where the bottle cap had been and came away with dust. He didn't tell me I was crazy, and he didn't tell me it was nothing. He said, "They come through sometimes," in the voice he used to say, "We get a lot of hail in April." He said, "They're mostly harmless if you don't, you know," and he didn't finish because he didn't have to. He took a breath and looked toward the door without looking at the glass. I said, "Why here?" And I realized how young that sounded. He shrugged with his whole face. "Could be the highway," he said. "Could be the old road under it. Could be the space between towns is bigger at night, and big things like bigger spaces. He sipped his coffee and winced at the taste he had taught me to make. What happens if you look? I asked, and I didn't ask it as a dare. He turned the question over in his mouth, and then set it down on the counter like a coin he wasn't going to spend. Some folks can tell you, he said. Some folks can't. You're not the first new kid to get a storm your first week. He met my eyes then and did me the courtesy of respecting the fear he found there. When he left, the day had fully arrived, but it felt like the day you have after a fever, thinner at the edges. The sun put hard shadows under the pumps and made the lot look honest again. I went out with a broom and swept the dust from patterns into piles, and then into the bin. In the space where the sedan had sat in the wrong way earlier, there was a black stain the wind couldn't lift. I stayed on for the next night because I told myself I wouldn't hand the fear shape by running from it. I told myself I needed the money and a clean routine. I told myself I had been warned and had survived because I listened. The line on the paper had been a lifeline thrown to me from a boat that had already passed. When midnight clicked again and the quiet found its spot over the roof, I took my place behind the counter like a man at a small altar. I had a plan, not much of one, but it was work. Keep my eyes low when I had to, watch the floor through the convex mirror's edge of reflection, keep my hands busy with things that had numbers. I put the bottle cap in my pocket, not for luck, but for a reminder that the world can change its rules without asking me. I taped the note from the bathroom to the underside of the register drawer because not seeing it felt like the right way to remember it. There are nights you survive by being smaller than what wants to notice you. There are nights you survive by making your own shape too difficult to pick up. There are nights you survive by telling yourself a sentence that gets between your eyes and the thing that would like to meet them. I stood there and kept the store open for the kind of customers we were built for, and for the ones we weren't but got anyway. Morning came slow and then all at once. A rancher bought diesel and talked about a fence line and didn't notice that I measured him carefully for human. A kid in a faded hoodie counted quarters out for a drink and didn't look at the mirror at all. A trucker rolled heavy and slow, engine like a tired heart, and he nodded to me the way people who are awake at the wrong time owe each other a small kindness. When I took the trash out, a coyote watched from the far edge of the lot, its head tilted, its eyes on my hands. It didn't flinch when I clapped. It didn't run when a car passed on the highway. It waited until I looked down at the bag, and when I looked up, the edge of itself had moved closer without moving. I went inside and locked the door and laughed once, a thin strip of sound. I checked the printer. One new receipt sat neatly on the tray, simple and clean in the morning light. Thank you for looking away. I put it with the others because Ray said not to throw any of them away, and because I needed proof that I had done at least one thing right. I still work there. I don't have a better explanation than the way the place fits around the hole inside me. Some nights are quiet in the ordinary way, a handful of people who know what they want and don't want to talk about anything while they get it. Some nights the door chime rings wrong and the wind stops like it's listening. On those nights, I keep to the rule that has a different weight to me now. It's a line between me and something that would like to be more than a visitor. It's a sentence that blocks another sentence I'm not strong enough to hear. After midnight, don't look at their eyes. The rest of that shift stretched thin, like the desert was holding its breath. Every tick of the cooler, every groan of the ice machine had weight to it now. I started hearing sounds I wasn't sure were inside or outside. Scratches, sighs, and something like a match being struck but never catching fire. I tried to drown it out with work. Stocking gum, rotating milk cartons, counting cigarettes. Routine was supposed to keep me grounded, but the air itself felt crooked, like gravity had tilted a degree to the left. Nothing on paper explained the way the receipt printer acted or why the man in the suit hadn't shown up on camera. At 2:40, the highway should have been dead, but headlights crawled up the ramp again. This time it was a pickup, the kind you'd expect to see hauling hay or tools. It rolled to a stop near pump 2, and for a long moment, nothing happened. No door opened. No window rolled down. I squinted through the glass, trying to catch a glimpse of the driver. The cab light flicked on by itself. Inside, the seats were empty. No driver, no passenger, just a wide bench seat covered in dust and a steering wheel that twitched like something had let go of it too quickly. I felt my chest tighten. Sometimes vehicles get abandoned, sure, but not while the headlights are on and the engine's running smooth as a heartbeat. I tapped the intercom and told myself it was just habit. Prepay inside. The words sounded thin in the empty night. The cab light snapped off, and the pickup lurched forward without anyone behind the wheel. It coasted back down the ramp, headlights painting the desert brush in harsh white strokes until the dark swallowed a hole. The sound faded too neatly, like someone fading a dial instead of an engine losing distance. I wanted to step outside, just to prove the world was still the same out there. But the air pressing against the glass felt too heavy, and the thought of the desert waiting for me made my throat close. So I stayed put, hands flat on the counter, listening. The printer murmured again. This one made me pause longer than the others. It wasn't just gibberish or a zeroed-out sale. The line item read, unleaded, 12.3 gallons paid. Except no pump had clicked on. No customer had stood at the register. And the timestamp? 3:13 a.m. I glanced at my phone. It was only 2:47, a sale that hadn't happened yet. I folded the slip and slid it into the drawer with the rest, telling myself maybe the system was glitching forward somehow. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that empty truck rolling itself back into the dark. And the way the steering wheel had twitched, almost like someone was still there, deciding whether to stay or leave. By the time 3 o'clock crawled around, I was buzzing with caffeine and nerves. The store looked too clean, too orderly, like I'd staged it for inspection. Even the hum of the cooler felt rehearsed. I sat on the stool behind the counter, trying to breathe evenly, waiting for the desert to forget I existed. That was when I heard it. The soft creak of the bathroom door hinge. I knew I'd locked it, the way Ray told me to, the way the rules said. But the sound was as clear as if someone had leaned their weight against it. I grabbed the spare key and walked slow toward the back. Every step felt like it cost more than the last. The closer I got, the colder the air felt, as if the door itself was breathing. I reached out, hands shaking, and pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. Then, 3 faint knocks from the inside. Not urgent, not loud, just steady, measured, as if whoever was in there had all the time in the world. My hand slipped off the knob. I backed away without unlocking it, forcing myself to remember the line written in that darker ink. After midnight, don't look at their eyes. I didn't know why it came to mind then, but the words carried the same gravity as the knocks, like a warning that belonged to the same family. I went back to the counter and tried to busy myself. Didn't call Ray. Didn't call the cops. Because what would I even say? Hey, the locked bathroom just knocked back at me. Even in the middle of nowhere, that would sound like I was losing it. So I sat there, staring at the mirror above the coffee station, half expecting to see someone slip out of the bathroom in my blind spot. But nothing moved. The only proof was the echo of those knocks, replaying in my chest, and the growing certainty that I wasn't alone in that building anymore. That was the first real night where I understood the job wasn't what I thought it was. Gas stations have their quirks. Remote desert shifts have their silence. But none of that explained empty cars, pre-written receipts, or locked doors that knocked. None of that explained the voices that spoke polite, practiced words with no air behind them. And none of it explained why, deep down, I already knew this wasn't a mistake in the system. It was something else. Something that belonged out there in the desert, and had been waiting for someone like me to see it. I just hadn't realized yet how far it would go. By the second night, I came in with my guard up. I thought maybe if I expected the weirdness, it wouldn't catch me so off balance. But that's not how it works out there. The desert waits for you to pretend it's normal, then reminds you whose ground you're standing on. Ray handed me the keys without asking about the last shift. That told me more than if he had. If I brought it up, I knew he'd just shrug and say something like, some nights are worse. and I didn't want to hear how many some nights he'd survived. I unlocked the door, flipped the lights, and the store came alive in its staged way. The cooler side, the fluorescent bulbs buzzed, and the register blinked awake with its hollow welcome screen. Everything looked just like it had the night before, but it didn't feel the same. It felt like stepping into a room after an argument, when the words still hang in the corners. I reminded myself of the rule. I said it under my breath like a mantra while I stocked the gum. After midnight, don't look at their eyes. It sounded stupid in daylight. At night, it sounded like survival. It was a little after midnight when the first customer came in. Or at least, that's what I told myself. He looked ordinary enough at first glance. Jeans, a work shirt, heavy boots dusted with desert grit. He carried himself like a man who'd been driving too long and wanted nothing more than coffee and fuel. The bell gave its usual coming-in chime, sharp and solid. No tricks this time. He walked to the coffee station without looking at me. I watched him from behind the counter, telling myself to breathe normal. There was nothing unusual yet. But then he picked up the empty coffee pot. It wasn't empty when I last checked. I'd brewed a fresh batch at 11:45, and no one had touched it since. But he tilted it toward the light, and the pot was bone dry, the glass bottom scorched. He shook it once, like he didn't believe it either. "Sorry, I'll make more," I said, stepping out from behind the counter. He didn't answer. He just set the pot down and turned, slow, like every muscle in his body had to remember how to do it. That was when I saw his face. It wasn't wrong in any obvious way. All the parts were there, eyes, nose, mouth. But the arrangement was just slightly unfinished, like a mask molded too quickly, or a painting where the features didn't quite line up with the brushstrokes. I froze. My eyes wanted to go straight to his, but the rule slammed into my head like a warning buzzer. So I focused on his mouth instead. That was worse. He smiled, wide and stiff, like someone had told him what a smile was, and he was trying it for the first time. No warmth, no recognition, just the shape of joy without the meaning. He held it there, stretching too long, until I thought my skin would split from the silence. I'll brew another pot," I managed. My voice cracked, thin and small in the buzzing air. I turned to the machine, forcing my hands to go through the steps. Filters, scoop, water, switch. When I looked back, he was gone. No sound of the door. No second chime. Just gone. I sprinted to the window. The lot was empty, the pump silent. Not a car in sight. Not even dust stirred where he might have driven away. The only proof was the pot, still bone dry, as if nothing had ever filled it. The printer coughed. One slip of paper curled into the tray. Coffee, 0.00 paid. By 1:30, I couldn't sit still. I needed proof the world outside still worked like it should. So I stepped out, locked the door behind me, and stood on the lot. The desert stretched wide and endless, stars pinning the sky like cold nails. The highway shimmered silver under the moon, a ribbon pulling east and west. For a moment, it was almost beautiful, quiet, still untouched. Then I noticed the silence. No engines, no distant tires on asphalt, no hum of traffic from the far-off truckers who usually threaded the highway like beads on a string. Just dead air. I walked to the edge of the lot, gravel crunching under my boots. The asphalt should have been warm from the day, but when I knelt and touched it, it felt cold. Not nighttime cool, refrigerator cold, like stone that had never seen the sun. I looked down the road. The white lines stretched ahead, clean and sharp, but the vanishing point kept moving. No matter how far I looked, the horizon pulled farther away, like the highway was unfolding in real time. And then, somewhere out there, a pair of headlights blinked into existence. They didn't rise from the horizon. They didn't approach like normal lights. They just appeared, two white circles burning in the dark, hanging at the perfect height for a car that hadn't been there a moment ago. They stayed fixed, too steady, like painted dots on a black canvas. Then they began to move. Not forward, not backward, just side to side, sliding across the horizon like eyes behind a curtain. I stepped back, heart hammering. The lights froze. And for the first time, I felt the pressure of them, like a weight pinning me against the lot. Like the space between me and those distant beams wasn't as wide as it looked. The printer shrieked inside the store. The sound snapped me loose, and I bolted back through the door, locking it behind me. The slip waited in the tray, crisp and fresh. Unleaded, 12.3 gallons paid. The same line I'd seen printed hours before. The one with the timestamp from the future. And now, that exact time blinked on my phone. I dropped the receipt and backed away from the counter. Outside, through the glass, the horizon was empty. The highway looked normal again. But I knew better. I stood very still behind the counter and listened to the humming things, the cooler, the lights, the tiny fan, and the lottery display, until my heartbeat stopped trying to run ahead of the moment. The highway outside looked ordinary again, but ordinary felt like a story the night was telling me, and I didn't trust it. I tucked the receipt beneath the others and shut the drawer gently, like I was putting a lid on a jar full of wasps. The air smelled faintly of hot metal, that coin-on-a-griddle scent that didn't belong to any hour. I told myself to do simple tasks. I refilled the napkin holders, lined the cups by size, and ran a finger along the counter until it came away gray with dust. When I bent to get a fresh roll of paper towels, I felt the tiniest vibration in the floor, a tremor so thin it could have been my imagination. It came again, a soft, steady thudding, far below the slab, like footsteps on a lower floor the building didn't have. I stood up too fast, and the room tilted. The thudding stopped, not because it had finished, but because it was listening. I put my palm to the tile. There was nothing to touch except the cold. The bathroom door, locked like always, sighed once the way a door does when air pressure tests the gap. I didn't go check it. I had learned that the store enjoyed being observed too much, and I had to ration what I gave. Instead, I walked the aisles, eyes down, counting the space between labels and the shelf edge. When the cooler compressors cycled, a skitter of frost peeled off the back wall and slid like glass beetles across the rack before melting. For a second, my reflection in the glass of the freezer doors didn't keep up with me. It lagged by one breath, and in that breath, its mouth moved as if it was trying to warn me about something I was already doing. I wiped the glass clean with the heel of my hand and watched my face resolve into the version that belonged to me. The radio under the counter clicked itself on. Static sifted out like sand through a screen, then aligned into a voice that sounded like it had been flattened and ironed. It recited coordinates in that careful, measured way, the cadence of a weather alert or a training manual. I knew them before the last numbers landed, south by the dry wash, the same cattle gate on the office map. Repeat, I said, because I had decided the previous night that answering made the world hold together. The voice repeated, but this time it changed one number by a single digit, sliding the gate a mile east in my mind. Then it said, undefined heat, which wasn't a thing the radio should know how to say. I shut it off and left it face down like a dead phone. The door chime did its full, ordinary two-note sound. I didn't look up right away. A habit had begun to grow in me. Treat the first second after the bell like a fuse and let it burn down before you touch it. I finished stacking a row of chips that didn't need straightening and turned slowly toward the entrance. A man stood there with a hat crushed flat in his hands, the kind you buy at a tourist stop and sweat into for a summer. His clothes were wrong for the hour, too clean, the creases too obedient. He kept his head angled politely down, as if he knew the rule and would make it easy for me to follow. His boots left no dust where he stood. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, defaulting to the sentence I'd learned to throw into the space between myself and anyone else. He opened his mouth, and nothing came out. Then he shut it and opened it again, and his lips shaped a word that looked like water, but it took him 2 tries to land on it. I nodded toward the cooler, grateful for the excuse to look away. He didn't move. He stood there like the idea of motion had to be given to him instead of owned. Then, in 3 precise steps, he arrived at the cooler door without using any of the space between. He reached for the handle and missed it by the width of a fingernail, his hand closing around air with a delicate, embarrassed certainty. I walked out from behind the counter before I could think better of it and opened the door for him. Cold rolled over my arms and up into my sleeves. He took a bottle by its middle as if it might bruise. When he set it on the counter, condensation had not begun to form. "How much?" he said, using the same voice the weather radio used when it wanted you to understand a thing without feeling it. I told him. He slid a card toward me and didn't release it until my fingers were almost under his, drawing a shy spark where our skin nearly met. I swiped without reading the name, because the names never made sense when I looked. "Would you like a receipt?" I asked, because routine is a fence you build in a hurry. He tilted his head to one side and then the other, measuring the question like weight. "Yes," he said, and when the slip printed, it curled toward him as if pulled. He took it and held it in front of his face, but slightly off to the side, the way you show a picture to someone standing behind you. He left without the chime. The door opened a little too far and closed a shade too slowly. When the glass stopped moving, the lot was empty except for the sifting dust, and the bottle of water sat sweating on my counter as if it had never been touched. The receipt on the tape read paid, guest, cash. I put the bottle back in the cooler and told myself that counted as cleaning. The wind, which had been a thin hiss all night, died so completely the building seemed to pull inward. Silence poured into the space where it had been like water into a mold. Out in the dark beyond the light's edge, something let out a cry that wasn't a coyote and wasn't a person and still hovered too close to both. I locked my knees to keep them from speaking for me. On the security monitor, the feed from the West Side camera glitched into a field of black pepper for a second and then cleared. The pumps were where they should be. The price signs lied the same as always. Then, in the far corner of the lot where the asphalt feathered out to hard pan, two parallel lines appeared like someone had dragged a heavy ladder through the dust. They started abruptly a few inches from the concrete, ran straight toward the road, and ended just shy of the shoulder. No tracks let in. No tracks let out. They didn't sink where they should have sunk, as if whatever made them spread its weight along a surface a little higher than ours. Before I could decide if I was going to walk out and ruin the evidence with my own boots, the phone on the counter rang once. Just once. Not the thin line ring of a call, but the old clatterbell sound from rotary days, a single metal throat clear. The display stayed blank. I lifted the receiver because not answering had begun to feel like offering up the wrong part of myself. Nothing spoke, but the ambient sound of the line wasn't empty. It had pressure like holding a shell to your ear and getting a station out of the air. Under it, faint and meant for someone else, I heard my own voice say, "Bathrooms closed after midnight." I hung up gently and put my palm in the center of the counter to find out if I was shaking. I was. I took the bottle cap from my pocket and pressed it into my skin until the ridges hurt a little. A useful pain, honest and small. Headlights swept across the front windows in a slow arc and came to rest at pump 4. A white passenger van sat there that hadn't been there before I blinked. The windows were clear, clean as glass can be in dust country, and I could see every seat belt cross every torso. They all faced forward, 10 body shapes in neat rows, hands resting where hands rest when no one tells them what to do. The intercom clicked when I pressed it, but my words didn't cross. The van idled, a purr too smooth for its age. The passenger door opened with a careful motion like a gesture in a classroom, and a woman climbed out with her purse clutched to her stomach as if she was keeping a small animal inside it calm. Her shoes were the wrong kind for the hour, church flats, glossy and new. I met her at the door because meeting her at the register felt impolite to something watching. Up close, the skin at her throat had that almost to even make-up stillness, as if 100 tiny expressions had been flattened into one blank, correct one. She looked past my shoulder at the coffee station with the interest of a person who had just learned about coffee. "Do you have the small cups?" she asked, almost smiling, the words assembled like a shelf. I nodded, and she nodded back, mirroring like a dance. The bell chimed the first note, and then swallowed the second. Inside, she stopped short, just at the seam between tile and mat, like there was a stripe painted there only she could see. Her purse made no sound when it touched the counter. "How far to the river?" she asked, voice polite and empty of breath. "There isn't any water within 20 miles, I said, because sometimes truth is a door you shut in front of a stranger. Her almost smile didn't change. "I see," she said, as if learning there was no river was the same as learning how to pronounce a difficult word. I poured her a small coffee and slid it toward her with my eyes on the lid. The heat didn't steam the way it should. She put a bill down that felt like paper that had never been a tree. I made change without looking up and without using the hand that still held the bottle cap. "Do you have a map?" she said, like she was practicing. "Out by the door," I said. She turned as though her movement hinged not on muscles, but on the idea of a hinge. Through the glass, her van full of people kept their faces forward, patient, as if the way out of the world depended on looking straight ahead. The bathroom door thudded once in the back, a polite knock at a polite volume, faint as a remembered sound. The woman's head tilted, first to that, then to me. The angle was precise, as if she had measured it. "We won't go that way," she said gently, and for a second I loved her for choosing the words that told me nothing. A row of napkins lifted in a slow wave near the hot dog roller, as if someone's hand had passed unseen along them. The store took a breath and waited to see if I'd notice. I pretended to be interested in the scratch-off display instead. The woman picked up the cup with both hands and held it under her chin like a prop. "Thank you," she said, and her mouth made the shape perfectly. She left with the same careful steps she had entered with. The chime played both notes, very soft, as if reminding itself. When she reached the van, she climbed into the driver's seat, set the coffee on the dash, and the entire row of passengers turned their heads at once, a field of sunflowers obeying a shadow. They pulled away with a silence that wasn't engine silence. The taillights didn't smear the night. They peeled it. At the edge of the lot where the dust had been combed into parallel lines, the van passed without making a track. Something like a faint print of their passing remained anyway, the suggestion of weight that didn't add up. I returned to my place behind the counter and found a coin that hadn't been there, dull, the wrong size, stamped with a bird I couldn't name. I put it with the bottle cap. The printer ticked and fed me a slip with nothing printed on it until the last inch, where a single word waited. Map. I folded it into the stack of the rest, because that was our ritual, and rituals work until the moment they don't. A gust pushed against the windows from a direction the wind doesn't usually favor, and the lights over Pump 1 blinked. I checked the cameras. On the south side feed, the world had the smeared look of heat over a grill, though the night was cool. Something stood at the edge of the frame, either very tall or very close, and my brain couldn't choose which to be scared of. The emergency stop for the pumps lives under a little red flap, and Ray says only customer fire or an earthquake earns a slap. I lifted the flap anyway and kept my hand near it. The pump numbers on the overhead display rolled to life on their own, 0.00, then a lurch to 0.01, twice like learning to count. On the island, the hose for Pump 3 mained an inch as if someone had picked it up and then reconsidered. I keyed the intercom out of habit. "Prepay inside," I said to the lot. The speaker gave me back a thinner version of my sentence, like an impressionist trying not to offend. The numbers on Pump 3 ticked to 0.02, 0.03, hung there like a breath, and stopped. The smell reached me then, not gasoline, not the oily, bitter fume that rides your clothes. It was mineral and metallic, damp in a way that made my mouth flood with saliva as if I had bitten a coin. I looked down without meaning to, and the pattern of dirt on the mat had changed into the outline of a foot that was wider than mine by half, splayed like someone had pressed it through fabric. The print pointed toward the bathroom. I went anyway. Not fast, not slow. I had learned that speed telegraphs. The key turned in the lock like it was tired, and I opened the door just enough to feel the cold leak around my fingers. The mirror above the sink held the room twice. The small tile, the faded employees must wash hands sign, the paper towel dispenser with its ragged tongue. It held me, too, and for a sliver of a second, it held not me, a parallel shoulder just behind mine, head tipped as if listening to a knock I hadn't heard yet. No one stood in the stall. No water ran. No light flickered. The air still carried that coin heat that wasn't heat. I left the door open so the space could breathe if it wanted to. Back at the counter, the receipt printer had spat a tangle of paper like a vine. Short slips, long slips, blank ones, dense ones with timestamps that skipped like stones. I gathered them and read as little as I could stand. Return, C clerk, NO sale approved, and then in the middle, neat and perfect, unleaded, 12.3 gallons, paid. I pushed the whole wad under the drawer and closed it with my hip. My hands were shaking again. I put them flat on the laminate and felt the ghost of the vibration from earlier in my bones. It moved through me like a word I didn't know the meaning of but could sound out. Headlights came fast, too fast for the ramp, and the screech I braced for didn't arrive. A sedan glided into the lot and came to a stop with that same stage stillness I recognized now. Parked on the line, wrong in a way a ruler would approve of. The windows were clear this time, and I could see the driver's profile, the neat ear, the line of the jaw, the hair combed with an attention that had left no mistake. He turned his head slowly toward the store, and the glass between us went the temperature of ice. I didn't look up. I kept my eyes on the card reader display, which showed insert card even though my hands were empty. The intercom breathed. The screen above the pumps flashed through messages too quickly to read, a flipbook of words that weren't ours. The sedan's door opened and shut without a sound. Footsteps approached with the cadence of a person who had listened to footsteps and was repeating them. They stopped exactly at the threshold. The bell did not ring. Bathroom, a voice said in the tone of a request wrapped in a statement. Closed. I answered, and my mouth was dry enough to split. A hand lifted into the edge of my vision and set down a set of keys. My keys, the store keys, the ones I had laid on the far side of the register a moment ago. Metal on laminate, delicate as a coin on a scale. Where did you get those? I said, more to hear the sound of myself than to ask anything. The hand slid back out of view without taking them. Bathroom, the voice said again, a little closer to the shape of pleading, and behind it I heard another voice nearly identical and not quite in time. I took the keys and put them in my pocket because a thing in your pocket is a thing other things have to climb into you to reach. I didn't have to look to know the head had tilted. The air carries the shape of motion without needing your eyes to tell you. It leaned, waiting to see if I would complete the social puzzle. I swept the counter instead, the world's stupidest broom in my hand, and the tiny pieces of grit made a sound like glass being planned. When the footsteps moved away, they didn't move the right amount. The door opened too far again and settled half a breath too late. On the cameras, the sedan sat empty, the driver's seat bearing the shape of someone who had been there long enough to sink a little and not at all. The sky to the east had not yet admitted any light, but a paler shade found its way into the screen like a thought. The power hiccuped just once like a heartbeat skipping. The lights went dim and then came back. In that half second, I saw the store in the emergency glow, and the emergency glow saw me. For that flash, the angle of the aisles bent inward like the store wanted me centered. Outside, a small column of dust wound itself up from the asphalt between pumps 2 and 3, a sand devil born without wind. It held together for longer than a thing like that should, then unfolded neatly as if dismissed. On the concrete below, a dark wetness spread that wasn't gasoline and wasn't water, a stain shaped like a hand not designed to touch flat things. It evaporated straight up, leaving no ring. I thumbed the emergency stop. The pumps went quiet in a chorus, a sudden prayer trimmed short. The numbers on the overhead display froze. For a moment, the lot felt abandoned. No machines, no cars, just a square of light in the desert that didn't belong. The feeling didn't last. Something tapped on the glass exactly at my level, once, twice, 3 times. Each tap was gentle and exact, like fingernails that had learned to measure. I kept my gaze down and breathed out slow enough to hear it. "You're very good at this," a voice said, and the politeness in it hurt worse than if it had been cruel. The tapping stopped. When I dared to glance at the glass, all I let myself see was the smudge left by whatever touched it, a half-moon shape with too many edges in the curve. I wiped it away with the hem of my shirt and told myself that counted as closing the register for a moment. Sometime near 4, the wind returned in a long, even line that pushed a curtain of dust from south to north. The sky took on that thin pre-dawn pallor, bone under skin. My body wanted to treat this as a promise of safety. I refused it. I had learned the difference between a change and a rescue. The phone gave one more metal cough of a ring. I lifted it and listened to nothing until the nothing thickened. Then, far away and too close, like hearing a recording of a room you were standing in, I heard the soft creak of the bathroom door hinge. It was followed by 3 knocks from the inside, patient and sure. I set the receiver down very carefully. The bathroom door stayed open when I had left it, but that didn't matter to whatever was doing the knocking. I walked back and stood with my shoulder against the frame. The mirror did not behave, which was somehow a comfort. If the mirror had started playing it straight now, I would have known I had lost something I needed. "Morning in 20, I said to the empty room, as if mornings could be negotiated. A moth battered itself once against the light, and then found a place to rest and be a piece of the ceiling. The tile held the cold in the way stone does after a shade has moved on. I closed the door, locked it, and left the key turned like a period at the end of a sentence. Back at the counter, the printer made one last offering. The slip was clean and centered and perfectly ordinary. Date, time, cash, exact, and at the bottom, a single line, open. I folded it once and tucked it under the cap of my pocket so it pressed against my thigh like a coin you don't want to spend. Outside, I watched the light think about coming back and try to measure how far the night had followed it. The first honest car of the morning drew a line of sound up the ramp. The uneven idle of a tired engine, the imperfect squeal of brakes. A rancher stepped in, mud on his boots from a water that had no business being near us. He bought diesel and 2 coffees and asked about the weather in the throwaway way people ask when they don't want the real answer. I gave him the version of the truth he could carry into the sun. When he left, he forgot his change, 2 bills and a quarter, and I watched him go without calling after him. On the floor where he had stood, his prints overlapped the wider, wrong ones until the pattern looked like a math problem I couldn't finish. I stepped on them deliberately as I walked him up. The day brightened, and the stain on the concrete outside turned back into concrete, as if heat had never been promised to us. I lived through morning on the small tasks again. I swept until the same dust returned to the corners. I refilled the lids. I broke down the cardboard. I counted scratchers in a rhythm that made a drum out of the counter's edge. When Ray's truck appeared, I learned the particular relief of another human shape at a distance you can afford. He parked far and walked slow, eyes on the lot like he was reading it. He didn't ask what, because he could smell in the store, the coin heat, the thin electrical tang the radio left, the way the air had been ironed. He poured coffee and stared at it like he wanted it to vote. "You did fine," he said finally, and the words took a long road to arrive. "They're worse before sun up," he added, almost absently. "They?" I asked, and I didn't want to know, but questions will claw their way out regardless. He lifted one shoulder. "Depend what you think of they is," he said. "Some folks say they're travelers. Some say they're locals from a time when local meant a circle you could walk in an hour. I say they because it's shorter than all the other words that don't fit." He tapped the emergency stop flap with a fingernail. "Good," he said. "Don't let them run the pumps if the numbers start on their own." I nodded like a student. He looked at the bathroom hall and then away. "You keep that locked?" he asked, already knowing. I told him about the knocks from the wrong side. He made a face that wasn't surprise. Sometimes the building remembers being a different building, he said. Sometimes they bring their own rooms with them. Don't open doors you didn't lock yourself. It was a good rule, and like the others, it arrived too late to be original. When he left, he took a stack of the worst receipts with him, the ones with no numbers, just that neat little look or map or open centered on the bottom. He slid them into an envelope and didn't seal it. "You going to keep working?" he asked without anything around the question to push it one way or the other. "Yes," I said, and I heard how quickly the answer came. I told myself I had reasons. Money. The way the job's small tasks pushed back the parts of my head that ran when I wasn't watching. The way the building and I were starting to speak a version of the same language. But I also knew there was another reason, a worse one. I wanted to see if the night had a bottom. I slept hard that day and dreamed of white lines that never met and were always about to. When I woke, my mouth carried the taste of metal, and the bottle cap had pressed its ridges into my thigh like a map I hadn't learned to read. I washed my face and didn't look too long into my own eyes. I put on the same shirt because the store liked me better when I came to it, as if I hadn't left. When I arrived, the sky was a shade bluer than it had been the night before, and for a silly second, I thought maybe that meant a difference I could feel. The neon cactus hummed its fly sound. The bell remembered how to make both notes. I unlocked the door, breathed the staged air, and walked into the place that didn't want me and kept me anyway. The first hours were honest. Locals, a trucker, a pair of teenagers whose bravado left a trail behind them like perfume. By midnight, the world turned its face a degree, and everything else politely pretended not to notice. I noticed. A bus rolled into view then, not a school one, not a charter, but something in between, white sides, no logo, windows clear but too clean, as if the dust had been taught not to touch them. It didn't climb the ramp. It drew level with the lot and idled in parallel, like a shark keeping pace with a boat without deciding yet about the boat. I knew better than to go outside. The aisle with the oil filters grew one item longer without my help, a row of identical shapes, suddenly hosting a brother that had not been there a blink earlier. I took it down and turned it in my hands. The label wore my company's colors, but the font wasn't ours by a hair, and the threads inside were cut in a spiral that went the wrong way and then corrected. I put it back where it had appeared because the shelf didn't like it when I argued. The bus blinked its hazards once, a suggestion of distress without a request for help. A figure rose in the driver's seat and didn't fill the space right. It stood and sat in the same movement, like two recordings layered a shade out of time. Out in the aisle, the small cardboard "2 for $3" sign lifted and swiveled to face the door the way flowers face a window. I kept my hands on the counter and my feet planted. The bathroom door made a small, modest sound again, the quiet cough of an old hinge. The mirror stayed wrong and honest. I didn't look toward the windows, and the bus waited like a question that had already been answered by a teacher I couldn't see. When it finally pulled away, it did so in a straight line that ignored the curve of the road. It didn't leave tracks. The hazard lights winked off in a way that implied they had never been on. In the emptiness it left, I thought I heard 10 people release 10 breaths in a room 2 states away. Dawn, when it came on its own schedule, indifferent to the work I had done to reach it. The sky moved from bone to paper to the color of a jar left out in the sun with water in it. Birds reconsidered their position and tried a few notes. The neon cactus clicked itself out. I put my forehead on my forearm and let the counter cool me. I thought about the way the van's passengers had all turned their heads at once, and the way the woman had promised to avoid a door I couldn't trust. I thought about the highway that unfolded like a tape measure made of horizon, and the ladder tracks in the dust that began and ended without arriving or leaving. I breathed. I put the bottle cap back in my pocket. I put away the coin with the wrong bird. When Ray's truck came a few hours later, he shook his head at the lot like a coach of a team that had won but learned nothing. He held up the envelope of receipts and said, You ever want to stop keeping these, don't? Even if you want to. I nodded because I'd already rehearsed that nod. He asked if the radio had read me the gate again. I told him yes, and I told him about the number that changed. That happens when they're trying to decide which world to use, he said. And if the sentence had been said by anyone else, I would have asked for a second draft. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. He put a hand flat on the counter like he was blessing it, and then he left me to another day and another night. I told myself I'd make it one more shift. One more. That's how you trap yourself, by telling yourself your own sentence and then believing it because you heard it in your voice. I turned the sign in the window from closed to open even though the sun already did that for us. The later nights, those get worse. They don't get louder or messier or more violent, not at first. They get precise. They learn you. That was how the last night before it broke began, with a precision I could feel in my teeth, a humming alignment of small things. The bell chimed both notes. The cooler breathed on the beat. The printer did not print until I felt ready to read, and then it printed only one word, in the middle of the strip, as polite as setting a plate. Stay. The receipt that said stay lay on the counter like an order. I didn't throw it away. I didn't file it either. I just let it sit, its little black letters staring up at me, until the air around it felt heavier than the rest of the store. The desert outside had gone flat. Not silent, flat. The difference is subtle, but you feel it in your ribs. It wasn't that the coyotes stopped yipping or the wind stopped its tricks. It was that all of it was happening far away, like the whole world had taken 3 steps back and left me under a dome. At 2:10, the glass front window shivered. Not rattled, not cracked. Shivered, like it had goosebumps. I pressed my hand to it, and the cold rushed in through my skin until my knuckles ached. Then came a knock. 3 slow, precise taps at eye level. I kept my eyes down on the receipt. The knocks came again, same rhythm, same place. The rule whispered in my skull. After midnight, don't look at their eyes. I held on to it like a rope. But curiosity is a cruel thing. It wants you to ruin yourself just to know what you shouldn't. I stared at the reflection instead. In the reflection, the counter sat neat, the aisle straight, and my own shape behind the register looked too thin, like my body had been traced wrong. Next to that shape, another outline leaned close to the glass, shoulders hunched, head cocked in an angle too sharp for a neck. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew they were there. The knock stopped. The glass warmed under my palm in a way that reminded me of a mouth-breathing fog. And when I stepped back, the receipt printer chirped and spat out a single, clean word. Open. I tore it off, crumpled it, and shoved it in my pocket with a bottle cap. My hand shook so badly, I dropped the rest of the roll. The paper coiled across the floor in a pale snake, curling toward the door. By 3 o'clock, I thought maybe the night had done enough to me already. But the desert doesn't work like that. It doesn't stop when you're tired. It stops when it's ready. Headlights drew up the ramp. A sedan this time, clean, ordinary, painted in that universal beige you see in rental fleets. It pulled into pump 2 and shut off its engine with a little cough. I braced myself for an empty cab. But when the driver's door opened, a man stepped out. Tall, middle-aged, wearing a plaid shirt tucked neatly into his jeans. He looked as human as anyone could look. He waved politely at me through the glass, like a man saying I'll be right in. And I almost believed him. The bell rang when he entered, both notes sharp and correct. Evening, he said, in a voice that carried air and weight. My chest loosened in relief. Maybe I'd finally gotten a real customer. He picked up a coffee, grabbed a bag of chips, and walked to the counter. I rang him up, took his cash, handed him change. Everything about it was normal, painfully, perfectly normal. But that was the problem. He didn't leave. He stood there, coffee in one hand, chips in the other, staring at the wall of scratch-off tickets like he was trying to read a language he'd never seen before. Minutes passed. The coffee didn't steam anymore. The chips bag didn't crinkle when he adjusted his grip. You need anything else? I asked, voice breaking. He blinked. Slowly. too slowly. Then he said, "No," in a tone so polite it might have been borrowed. But still, he didn't leave. He just stood there, body angled toward the door but feet nailed to the tile. Every so often, his head tilted, just like the suit man, just like the woman with the purse. Like he was listening for a sound I couldn't hear. At 3:15, the bell rang again. A woman entered this time. She looked like a traveler. Ponytail, hoodie, sneakers, phone in hand. She smiled at me, paid for gum, said thank you in a warm, ordinary voice. And then she stayed too. She walked the aisles once, then stopped by the cooler, staring at the glass like she could see something moving on the other side. When I checked my reflection, her shape was there, but her mouth didn't match the smile she wore. By 3:30, there were 5 of them. All normal, all wrong. Each had bought something small, gum, chips, coffee, a soda, and then refused to leave. They just loitered, spread across the store, frozen in their little poses like mannequins waiting for a cue. I couldn't breathe right. The store felt too full, but none of them touched one another. They just existed, filling the space with a presence that pressed on my ribs. The worst part was the sound. There wasn't any. No shifting feet. No plastic crinkling. No sipping or chewing or breathing. Just silence, as if the building itself was holding its breath to see what I'd do. I want to scream at them to get out. But the rule in my head hissed louder. Don't look at their eyes. So I stare at the register numbers instead, watching them blink 0.00 over and over like a heartbeat. At 3:47, the bell rang again, and all 5 of them turned their heads in perfect unison toward the door. That was when I knew the night wasn't finished with me yet. The 5 of them stood frozen across the store, each holding their little purchase, each staring at the door with heads tilted the same way, like they'd heard something coming I hadn't yet. I stayed behind the counter, hands flat, heart thrashing in my chest. The register's green glow blinked 0.00 over and over, steady as a clock. Then the bell rang again. Both notes, clean and sharp. The door swung open. The air that entered wasn't air. It had weight, like the pressure shift when a storm front crashes down on you all at once. The fluorescent lights buzzed high, too high, then dimmed until the whole store looked like it had been underwater for a moment. And something stepped inside. I didn't look up. Couldn't. My gaze stuck to the counter. The 5 already in the store shuffled back a half step, clearing space, like they were making way for royalty. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Not heavy, too exact for that. Each one landed with the sound of someone tapping a finger on glass. I told myself not to move, not to breathe, just exist as small as possible. But then the footsteps stopped on the other side of the counter, right in front of me. The smell rolled over me first. Not gas, not coffee, not desert dust. It was metallic, sharp, wet, like someone had poured rainwater over a handful of pennies. It filled my mouth, coated my tongue, pressed against the back of my teeth. A hand entered the edge of my vision. Pale, too pale. The skin stretched wrong, like it had been fitted over the bones at the last second. The fingers bent forward, then back, before finding the right way to curl. It said something on the counter. I forced myself to glance. Keys. My keys. Even though I'd shoved them deep into my pocket an hour ago. You dropped these, a voice said. Flat. Patient. Like it had been rehearsing that line until it sounded almost human. I couldn't answer. The hand didn't move away. It lingered, fingers splayed, waiting for me to look higher, to follow the line of the arm up to where its face should have been. Every nerve in me screamed to check, to confirm, to see. But the rule rattled in my skull. After midnight, don't look at their eyes. The 5 others shuffled forward. Closer now. One stood by the candy rack. One by the coffee station. Another leaned against the bathroom door, ear pressed to the wood. The one at the counter tapped the keys once with a single finger. The sound echoed too long, as if the counter itself had agreed to play along. Then it said, "Would you like a receipt?" My printer chirped on cue and fed out a long strip of paper that spilled over the drawer. I couldn't breathe right. My lungs drew in shallow little sips, like too much air would be noticed. The strip of paper curled into my lap. The only word on it, printed dead center, was, "Look." I clenched my fists, dug the bottle cap into my palm until I thought I'd bleed. I whispered no, barely moving my lips. The hand on the counter twitched. The head above it leaned closer. Something wet dripped on the laminate. One drop. Two. Clear like water, but when it hit, it hissed the way oil does on a skillet. The smell doubled, hot metal and rain. The bathroom door rattled behind me. 3 steady knocks. Then a fourth. Then silence, thick and swollen. The 5 all tilted their heads together. Perfect sync. Their necks creaked like rope pulled tight. The one at the counter said again, softer this time, "Would you like your receipt?" My stomach clenched. The printer squealed and spat another slip. This one fell blank. Blank until the very bottom, where it printed my own name. That broke me. I shoved back from the counter, stool screeching against tile. The hand pulled away. The 5 figures stepped aside as I bolted down the aisle, toward the back, toward the storage door. The lights overhead flickered fast, like a strobe. Every flash showed them closer. One at the end of the candy aisle. One crouched by the cooler glass, mouth pressed to it. One blocking the bathroom door. The storage room lock stuck. It always stuck. I pulled, twisted, slammed my shoulder. It wouldn't give. Behind me, the footsteps came again, that glass-tapping rhythm. Slower now, savoring. I could feel them gaining. I could feel their eyes on the back of my head, begging me to turn. I slammed the key into the lock and yanked until the metal screamed. The door flew open. I stumbled inside, slammed it shut through the bolt. Darkness swallowed me. No lights in here except the tiny glow of an emergency exit sign. I pressed my back to the door, chest heaving. On the other side, silence. Too much silence. Like they'd stopped walking, stopped breathing, stopped existing, all waiting for me to open it again. The printer out front chirped once more. I heard it even through the wall. A final slip spooling into the empty store. Then a voice pressed itself through the thin wood of the storage door, quiet, calm, and unbearably polite. "You forgot your change." I pressed my ear to the wood and heard the store breathing me in. The door wasn't thick enough to feel like safety. It flexed a little with the weight of a hand I couldn't see. My name came again, soft as lint. I scanned the dark room for anything I could use. Mop bucket, case of windshield fluid, a crate of expired jerky. There was an emergency exit at the back. Metal bar, painted shut along the edges by 1,000 dust storms. A sign promised an alarm that had never worked in my time. I wedged the mop handle through the door, pull, and lean hard. The bar groaned. Something on the other side of the storage door tapped 3 times in reply, patient as a metronome. I breathed through my teeth and shoved. The bar gave. Cold air punched in, carrying the dry smell of creosote and hot iron. I slipped through the gap, dragging the door behind me until it latched. The lot opened in front of me, a black plane washed in pale light from the canopy. I kept low, kept my eyes on the concrete. The pumps hummed dead. Emergency stopped still in. Beyond the islands, the desert lifted its shoulder at the sky, preparing for dawn. The store windows glowed like aquarium glass. Shapes moved past the aisles inside with a patient grace that didn't belong to customers. They were arranging themselves, I realized, making little stations of stillness in places where people like to stand. I moved along the wall to the electrical panel, rust around the hinges, padlock hanging but not locked. When my fingers touched the metal, it shocked cold, like it had been buried in snow. The main breakers were labeled in Ray's shaky block letters. Canopy, cooler, interior lighting. If I killed the lights, I didn't know who I was helping. Behind me, pebbles ticked on concrete. Footfalls, light and measured, tested their distance. I didn't turn. I said the alphabet under my breath, just to give my mouth a job. Glass whispered, not a shatter, a slide, as if a door had opened that wasn't a door. The smell of wet metal lifted and laid itself over my shoulders like a hot shawl. I pulled the interior lighting breaker. Fluorescence died in a hard blink. Only the canopy lights remained, and the red exit sign bled through the windows like a wound. The motion inside slowed. It was like watching something in thick syrup. They drifted, stalled, corrected, tried again. Without the buzzing light to mimic, they had fewer rails to follow. I had taken away their metronome and given them silence. A hand touched my sleeve. I jerked so hard I hit the panel with my shoulder. The hand didn't squeeze. It simply guided, sliding down until its cool palm met my wrist. My skin crawled. Something in the temperature of it stirred an old, animal refusal. It tried to turn my hand so my body would turn with it. I let the movement carry me halfway and then wrenched free. Fingertips brushed my jaw. A gentle lift. A coaxing. My throat locked. I dropped to a crouch, rolled my shoulder under the line of the touch, and came up with a mop handle like a spear. I jabbed at the space in front of me, not to hurt, just to make distance. The handle met resistance that felt like fabric hung in cold water. A voice right above me, polite to the point of holiness. Please. Another voice, inside that one, asked the same word a half-beat late. I backed along the wall until my heel found the corner seam at the storefront. The bottle cap dug into my palm hard enough to score. I risked one sideways glance. Not at faces, not at heights, just at the convex safety mirror through the window. For an instant, it held the whole store in one trembling circle. A cluster of figures leaned over my counter like parishioners at a rail. The nearest turned slightly, and the mirror caught where its eyes should be. They weren't eyes. They were discs of wet dark, coins soaked in rain, turned to catch a light that wasn't there. They reflected nothing. They ate reflection. I flinched and looked down so hard my neck spasmed. The touch at my jaw returned, firmer now. The store made a new sound then, a soft, low rushing like a big cat's per run through wires. All around me, I bolted along the storefront toward the office door. My key ring chimed in my pocket like a bell I needed to ring. Behind me, footsteps ticked in that glass finger rhythm, patient as counting. The office knob fought me, then spun. Inside, the radio sat on the desk like a dead insect. I snatched it up, flipped it, and turned the dial with a thumb that couldn't find purchase. Static rolled out like grain. Then the voice came, dressed in weather cadence. The coordinates, clean and careful. I spoke into it. I said the numbers back wrong by one. My own voice sounded like it was learning to walk. The static rose, startled. In the window, a pale shape halted mid-step, as if the frequency had snagged it. It wavered, head tilting to fit a new grid. Behind it, the others slowed in sympathy, like a flock catching a gust. I gave the wrong number again, louder, breaking the pattern they had offered me. Something struck the office door. Not hard, not soft, just exactly the weight of a person deciding to be there. The handle turned. I put my foot against it and leaned. The voice in the radio flattened, lost its edges, and said, in my own tone, "You left the bathroom unlocked." I swallowed and didn't answer. A seam of light crawled across the carpet, thin as a blade. It came from the bathroom hall, under the door I had locked, under the door I trusted more than I should. It widened, then narrowed, then waited. The store outside went very quiet. I gripped the radio and walked out of the office because the room was shrinking around me. Down the hall, the bathroom door stood shut the way I had left it. But the gap at the floor glowed a little like the desert had put daylight on the wrong side. I pressed my palm to the wood and felt cold run up my arm. 3 knocks. Not from inside. From behind the wall beyond. As if the building had grown another room facing another world. Then a 4th, off-tempo, like something was learning the rhythm. I put the key in. Turned it. If I followed Ray's rule about doors, this one still belonged to me. The latch clicked like a tongue. Inside was the bathroom. Sink, mirror, stall door jar. The mirror, faithful to its habit, lagged and doubled, showing me a second me half a breath behind. Beyond the stall, where a wall should be, the tiles opened onto night. Not black, not empty. A wash bed, pale and dry, lit by a moon that didn't match our sky. Fence posts stood crooked along a cattle gate I had seen only on a map. Cold lifted off it like breath. The smell of wet metal strengthened, honest as blood. Footprints tracked across the silt, too wide and splayed, arriving from nowhere and going nowhere, just pressed there as a possibility. Something on the far side shifted, tall and patient. Behind me, the gentle tap-tap of footsteps settled close. A hand reached past my shoulder for the door, as if to help. "Open," the voice said, reverent. I slammed the door and jammed the bolt. The hand caught in the jam for a heartbeat. It was rubber soft and bone solid together. When I pushed harder, it yielded with a sound like fabric sliding off glass. The voice didn't change. "Please," it said, as if I had dropped my own name on the floor and it was returning it. I backed down the hall, sideways, not giving them my face. The radio spat numbers that made no grid. Out front, the printer screamed and fed a waterfall of paper that unscrolled to my feet. Each slip bore one word, marching up from the bottom. Open, open, open. The world pivoted toward dawn. I felt it before I saw it, the tilt in the air when the dark has less to hold on to. The figures around me seemed to notice too. Movements tightened. Politeness frayed. One of them climbed the counter. Not a leap. A fold, like fabric learning how to be a body. Its arm reached over and found my chin with the delicacy a mother uses to check a fever. I dropped, rolled, and came up with a squeezed bottle of sanitizer from under the counter. Stupid weapon. Best I had. I sprayed until the gel gleamed on its skin like sugar glass. It hissed, not in pain, but like a tape finding the right speed, then pulled back and shook its hand as if rehearsing how to be hurt. The others drew closer. All along the windows, heads inclined at a shared angle, a chorus deciding on a note. The smell deepened until I could taste copper in my gums. I ran for the panel again, dragged the canopy breaker down. The outside lights died. The red exit signs burned like eyes that belonged to the building, not to them. They faltered. Press closer anyway. The one with sanitizer sliding from its fingers reached through the gap in the counter and patted the surface like it was looking for a misplaced wallet. "Change," it murmured, sweet as a cashier. The sky at the edge of the world went gray. Just a smear. Enough. They felt it the way animals feel a train through rails. The pressure in the store lifted a hair. Their synchronization stuttered. One step back involuntarily, heels skidding on top the way a person does when they forget their feet are real. A sound like a hell breath leaving a room moved through them. I took my chance and ran for the front door. My shoulder hit the push bar. The bell tried and failed to make sound. Outside air rushed in, colder than it had any right to be. They didn't chase me onto the concrete. They gathered at the threshold like a tide, stopped by a line, chalked by a child. Hands hovered in the doorway, as if they expected a counter to be there to touch. Behind them, the bathroom door shivered once and stilled. The first slice of sun cut the ridge. Gold touched the pump numbers. The stains on the concrete flattened into ordinary dark. A thin whine rose in the building, traveled the wires, and went out into the poles, like a mosquito leaving your ear. They receded without turning, not walking, unarriving. Each shape smoothed into the light the way frost takes a breath under a warm hand. One lingered. It had the plaid shirt from the man who'd never left, and the posture of a driver who'd been good his whole life. It lowered its head, almost a bow, almost kindness. I saw the place where its eyes should have been gather and shine like wet coins stacked in the dark. I looked at the concrete between us. The bottle cap bit my palm. The sun widened its line. By the time I raised my head again, the doorway held only dust and the reflection of me, too thin and too tired, standing where the night had tried to set me down. I locked the door. I left the lights off. I stood with my forehead against the glass and felt the building stop holding its breath. The receipt printer ticked and offered one last slip, ordinary in the new day. It read, Thank you. Under it, smaller, as if the machine had learned to whisper, see you tonight. I didn't move for a long time. The receipt lay in my hand like proof I hadn't imagined any of it. Sunlight painted the lot, honest and golden, but the word see you tonight burned darker than ink. I stuffed in my pocket with the others, my fingers brushing the bottle cap, my only shield that made sense. The pumps hummed back to life when the power company decided it was time. The canopy lights flickered once before shutting down for the day, like they were tired too. The store smelled faintly of coffee again, faintly of dust, faintly of a place where nothing strange had happened at all. But I knew better. At 6:20, Ray's truck pulled in. He parked far, like always, scanning the lot with those squinting eyes that saw more than he'd admit. He climbed out slow, shoulders hunched against the sun that didn't bother him yesterday. When he reached the door, he didn't ask to be let in. He waited, hand hovering just short of the handle, until I unlocked it for him. You made it, he said. No question, no smile, just the flat statement of fact. He sniffed the air, frowned, then walked behind the counter and gathered the mess of receipts like a farmer picking weeds. He didn't read them. He never did. He just slid them into an envelope already bulging. You'll keep working? He asked, casual as weather talk. Yes, I said, even though every muscle wanted to scream no. But saying no felt like telling the desert I was finished with it, and I didn't think you got to decide that. Ray just nodded, poured himself coffee, and looked toward the bathroom hall without stepping that way. They didn't take you, he said softly. It wasn't comfort. It was more like a note in a ledger, a tally mark under survivors. Then he added, don't let him in the bathroom. Don't let him in your eyes. The words carried the weight of scripture. He didn't stay longer. He never did. He left me alone with the building again, like handing back a child that had bitten him before. I should have quit. I should have driven until the tank ran dry and never looked back. But the desert does things to you. It chews on the soft parts of your life until all that's left is a person shaped to fit it. By the third day, I'd fallen into routine again. Stock the shelves. Count scratchers. Wait for the bell. Wait for the wrong. The job had stopped being about money. It was about making it through to another sunrise. The locals came in daylight like nothing was strange. A rancher bought diesel and mentioned a missing cow. A couple grabbed sodas on their way west. None of them looked at me long. None of them asked why the mirrors in the store were turned to face the ceiling. When the sun slid behind the ridge, I felt the building change again. The air grew heavier. The cooler's hum sounded rehearsed. The neon cactus lit up with its bug-zapped drone, a tired soldier reporting for duty. I remember the note I'd found that first week. After midnight, don't look at their eyes. I repeated it 3 times in my head, just like I had every night since. It had saved me once. Maybe it would save me again. Somewhere around 2 a.m., the printer coughed. I froze. The slip that slid out was simple, clean, almost gentle. It said only, welcome back. The bell chimed one note, just one, and held it too long. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. I knew the customers weren't human, and I knew the desert had decided I was part of its nightly show now. I gripped the counter, whispering the rule under my breath. Not a prayer, a survival tactic. After midnight, don't look at their eyes. Behind me, the bathroom door sighed. The cooler clicked. The silence leaned closer, waiting to see if I'd make the mistake that would let them in. I didn't. Not that night. Not yet. But the receipts kept piling up, and every single one of them whispered the same promise. That one night, I wouldn't be strong enough to look away. I still work there. I still walk into the desert gas station every night at mile marker 285. Some nights are empty. Some nights are full of things pretending to be people. And every sunrise feels like a temporary pardon. So if you ever find yourself out there, lost, tired, thirsty, desperate for a cup of coffee or a tank of gas, remember what I'm telling you now. You'll see the neon cactus humming. You'll see the pumps waiting. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see me behind the counter, eyes fixed down at the register, refusing to meet yours. It isn't rudeness. It isn't fear. It's the only way to survive this place. Because after midnight, you never know who's walking through that door. And after midnight, you must never look at their eyes.